Hi, this is Steve Cordy for More EV. I'm making another short video using the software program Poker Snowy. So the quiz question for this lesson is, on this river, holding ace jack, having 3-bet from the small blind against a button steal, and bet flop and turn, with around an 80% pot bet remaining, should we check, bet a small amount, or go all in? So maybe pause the video and try and think of the solution. So to get there, let's go back to the start of the hand and work through it step by step. So it's folded round to the button who raises for 3 big blinds, and with a hand like ace jack, whilst we get occasionally call for deception, with a strong Broadway, it's a good idea to 3-bet. Typically in the button's calling range are going to be hands that we dominate, which is good. So we choose to raise to 18, and Snowy agrees this is correct, whilst he's suggesting calling some of the time as well. So we raise to 18, button calls, and we get a nice flop, reasonably uncoordinated and rainbow, with top pair top kicker. So would you be checking or value betting here? So I'd suggest as a mandatory value bet. We're going to get called by certainly weaker jacks, draws, weaker pairs, and some floats. So obviously Snowy agrees. Our bet gets called, and on a turn that completes a straight for 9-10 and gives some 2 pairs for 7-8, so it's in our opponent's range, would you be continuing to bet for value here or checking? So I'd suggest betting for value is going to be best. There's a lot of hands that have just picked up gut shots, such as Jack 10 or 8-9, that may want to continue. So there's certainly value in betting. Snowy agrees, betting is correct. So we bet around half pot. Perhaps justify betting a little more here given the draws that are in play for our opponent. And on a brick, so our opponent calls the turn. And then we come back to the question on this brick river, should we be checking or going all in for around 80%, or betting a smaller amount? So to try and establish that decision, try and make that decision, we need to first try and determine our opponent's range and compare that to the range that our opponent will call a bet of different sizes with. So see what Snowy thinks of our opponent's current range. So here's the cards, and here's the probability of each one in Snowy's opinion. So obviously at the top we've got sets, straights, and trip twos, hands that he's not going to be folding. Then you come down to the equivalent of our hand here at ace jack, and then we got a few weaker jacks, and then a lot of the hands that sort of had 1 pair plus gut shot on the turn, or one pair plus flush draw, or a flush draw plus a straight draw on the turn. So whilst our hand certainly comes towards the top, but if you were to sort of write out all these probabilities, if we were to consider whether to go all in. Problem is that whilst our hand comes towards the top, it's coming towards the top of his current range. It's not necessarily coming towards the top of the range of hands that he'll call an all-in bet with. So the problem for us in considering an all-in is that there's a lot of hands like your 7-9s or your 8-9s that may have called the turn and that aren't going to consider calling an all-in bet. So if these are all folding, then we win the same amount against those whether we check or bet. So they sort of can't factor those into our river decision. So when you exclude those, then the only hands that we're beating are the sort of the King Jack. Maybe the Queen Jack would have already folded by now, and the Jack 10, maybe that would have already folded by now. So there's starting to be less hands with which he's going to call. So the other option would be to bet a smaller amount, and the idea of that would be to encourage as many of these weaker jacks as possible to call. Because that's why we're betting for value. We want a weaker jack to call. We're accepting that sometimes we're up against a stronger hand, and so the value in betting is to get some of these weaker jacks to call. So perhaps something around a half pot bet, or maybe even less, is going to be better than an all-in. Let's see what Snowy thinks. And when compared to the 0.85% of pot bet, which would be an all-in, Snowy's preferring a check. But if we were to consider a half pot bet, Snowy's slightly preferring a bet. It's an interesting spot to make a bet of slightly less than half pot as well, I'd say. So looking at this, I'd say around half pot or less. It's going to encourage all of his weaker jacks to call. I'd say we're really going to get bluffed on, really going to get bluff raised with the little amount that we're leaving behind. So if we do get raised, I think we can safely fold, knowing that we're not getting bluffed. So that's it for this short lesson. Thanks for listening, and please look out for the next one.